am Hallicasser-Jayne, and welcome to the Hallicasser-Jayne Show, a podcast akin to the great salons of times past. Pour yourself a martini, grab a spot on your favorite sofa, and listen to the great artists, writers, politicians, and celebrities of our day discuss and debate the current political and economic scene, art and music, film, literature, or maybe talk about the newest trends in fashion, design, and haute cuisine. Whether it's the current political cocktail or the latest must-read award-winning book, we tackle all topics and like to stir and sometimes shake things up. I recently had the pleasure to speak with Dan Pfeiffer, a former senior advisor to President Obama, now co-host of the popular political podcast Pod Save America, and the author of a revealing new memoir, Yes, We Still Can, Politics in the Age of Obama, Twitter, and Trump. You'll hear our conversation in a minute. Then stay tuned for my interview with the author of Obama and Oral History 2009 to 2017, Brian Abrams. We have a lot to get to, so let's. When Dan Pfeiffer, senior advisor to President Obama, now co-host of the popular podcast Pod Save America, shut the door to the Oval Office for the last time, closing the chapter on our first African-American president and leaving the highest office in the land to Donald J. Trump, racist and reality TV star, it was more bitter than sweet. Pfeiffer tells the story of his fascinating year serving President Obama in his smart, witty, revealing new memoir, Yes, We Still Can, Politics in the Age of Obama, Twitter, and Trump, an irreverent, no BS take on the politics of our time. On November 9th, 2016, Pfeiffer, like many of us, woke up wondering what the, well, you know what, had just happened. How had Donald Trump won the White House? How had a decent and thoughtful president been succeeded by a buffoonish reality TV star, and, as many of us wondered, asked himself, what do we do now? But instead of throwing away his phone and moving to another country, which he admits were his first and second thoughts, Pfeiffer decided to tell his surreal story, recounting how Barack Obama navigated the insane political forces that created Trump, explaining why everyone got 2016 wrong, and offering a path for where Democrats can go from here. Pfeiffer was one of Obama's first hires when he decided to run for president and was at his side through 2 presidential campaigns and 6 years in the White House, serving as the White House communications director, then as senior advisor to President Obama. Let's talk with Dan Pfeiffer. Hi, Dan. How are you? I'm great. How about you?
I'm good.
Well, good, and welcome.
I'm good.
So glad to have you here. Absolutely thrilled. So talk to me about this. Let's begin with Yes, We Still Can. Yes, we still can what?
Yes, we still can survive the Trump era. No, seriously. Yes, we still, like, if you think of, obviously it's an homage to the Obama slogan that yes, we can. Yes, we can have a politics that can be progressive and inclusive and thoughtful. And there a lot of people had a feeling, myself included, in the days, weeks, months, and even years now after the 2016 election, that maybe we're doomed to a politics that looks like the one that Donald Trump tweets about. And part of this book has several points. One is to extract some lessons from the Obama era about how to beat Trumpism, not just Trump, but also to remind people that if we do the work, we can make it so that Donald Trump is an aberration, not the new normal in politics.
Oh, God, from your mouth to God's ears, darling. Talk to me about it, right? It's true. Talk to me first, because your story is fascinating. How are you even connected to Obama? I mean, tell us that real quick, because I think everybody needs to hear that story fast.
Sure. So I had been in politics for a long time. A Democrat in the early 2000s meant you lost a lot of campaigns. These are tough years for Democrats, starting with my first campaign, which was Al Gore's brutal loss to George W. Bush. And I had spent many years trying to find a candidate I deeply believed in and a presidential campaign, frankly. And I worked for 2 candidates, first Tom Daschle and then Evan Bayh, who came all the way up to the point of running for president and then dropped out the last minute. Evan Bayh even announced his exploratory committee before dropping out 6 days later. And so I found myself unemployed right at the exact moment that Barack Obama was making the decision to start running, was looking to hire some communication staff. And I had fortunately had a lot of friends who had worked with me for Tom Daschle over the years who had gone to work for Barack Obama and were either working in a Senate office or helping him think about a presidential campaign. And they were constantly telling me how amazing Obama was. But I had never met him until I got invited to a 1-hour meeting in his office right after the new year in 2007. It's the first time I'd ever met him. I'd obviously seen the speeches and I'd read the books in preparation for the meeting, but I had no idea what to expect. And frankly, I was a little skeptical because, they say never meet your heroes, and that's most often true in politics, where people rarely meet up to the hype machine. And I walked into a meeting with Barack Obama. I walked out of that meeting with having accepted a job without knowing what I was going to make, what my title would be, or when I was even in Chicago, because I just knew right away that this campaign and this candidate were something that doesn't come around very often.
Love at first sight. Think about it.
Yes, exactly.
It should happen to us all. You know that old phrase, we live in interesting times? I think that's an understatement these days, and surely doesn't. Right, really, seriously.
Right.
And it surely doesn't really tell us what's going on in the country. What do you think is going on here, Dan? I mean, after the most civil presidency in decades, no drama, Obama, how the hell did we wind up with Trump?
That is a great question, and I try to explore this question in the book with the caveat that in a race that was decided by 80,000 votes over 3 states, both everything and nothing is responsible for the loss, right? And so it is like, I think you have to separate two things, which is, it seems pretty clear based on data that had the Russians not hacked the DNC and Jon Favreau's emails, had they not engaged in this massive campaign of election interference using trolls and bots and Facebook and Twitter, had Jim Comey decided not to ignore Department of Justice protocol and unburden himself about an investigation that didn't exist and didn't really matter if it did, in the days before the election, Hillary Clinton probably would have won and would be having a very different conversation right now. I most certainly would not have written this book. That all being true, but I think the question isn't necessarily why we lost. It's what are the political forces that created an environment where Trump can win, or even be within one Jim Comey letter away from winning. Like, that's the question Democrats have to ask ourselves. And I think there's a whole set of circumstances here that we need to both understand and then as Democrats figure out how to navigate if we're going to get out of this mess. And so I would put on that list a racially based Republican backlash to having an African-American president named Barack Hussein Obama, a failure of the Republican Party to stand up to that racist backlash and instead to try to mobilize it, weaponize it for political gain. You have Fox News stoking all the flames and sort of in creating a propaganda bubble. You have social media, Facebook and Twitter in particular, changing media in ways that benefit the trivial and benefit outrage, both of which help our trivial, outrageous president right now. And so all of these things together is that the ground shifted underneath our feet, and Democrats myself included, which is why I was so confident Hillary was going to win, did not fully understand how the new rules could benefit someone maybe even the lack of rules could benefit someone like Trump.
Yeah, I like that explanation. I could be a little brutal here because I have to ask this. It's not a question asked a lot, and I think that we need to look at it for an answer. I'm with you. We need to figure out how we're going to, as a party, we're going to get rid of this dude. But did Obama lose those? In the old days, we called them blue dog Democrats. Is he responsible for missing? I mean, and I think it's a question that is fair to ask and needs to be asked to really fully answer all of this for the coming midterms in 2020. Talk to me.
Sure, I think everyone has responsibility here, right? So I think we all have to look at ourselves. I would note that the data says that is not true because Obama won these voters in 12, and most of the data I've seen about the undecided, there's different ways to cut the data, but suggests that there were people who voted either for Trump or voted for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein, which are lost votes for Hillary Clinton that helped tip the election, who had high approval ratings of Obama. So I think it is fair to question why, and this is a fair question to ask him, the entire Obama presidency, why was he or we, his political team, not able to transfer his popularity to other candidates when he was not on the ballot, right? So we had 5 elections during the time Barack Obama was president, 2008, 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016. The 2 in which he was on the ballot, Democrats made huge gains all up and down the ballot and then the House and the Senate. And were it not for gerrymandering, might have taken the House back in 2012 and came very close to, and grew a Senate lead in 2012. 2010, 2014, he wasn't on the ballot. 2016, which even though it was a presidential year, which should benefit Democrats, you had both people who approved of Obama who did not turn out to vote for Hillary Clinton, but you also had people who voted for Obama in 2012, particularly in rural areas, who voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. That is a question that we need to explore, and there needs to be much more of a deep dive into those voters. My belief is that at least some of them may be gone forever. There's just the consequence of sort of the great partisan sorting in our country, but some of them we can get back, and that's going to take a concerted messaging effort at them that is largely, I think, less about it was certainly about a populist democratic agenda, which I think is very important, economic agenda, but also explaining why the great promise of the populist Trump runs headlong into the corporatist governing agenda of the Trump administration and the congressional Republicans.
How many avenues can I go down with you on that? Oh, my God.
Go. Okay. It's your show. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But let me digress for a minute because I want to talk a little bit more about how adorable you are. You're a man of great wit. This was a fun read, I have to tell you. I mean, I was laughing my whole way through.
Oh, thank you.
All right. But, it made me think, Obama has this austere, kind of persona, the no drama guy, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we see, moments of the twinkling eye and all of that kind of stuff. He surely has. But is he as funny as you are? What kind of boss was he?
He is much funnier than me.
No.
I mean, as you've seen that in his White House Correspondents' dinners, his appearances, on, Chef Myers or Leno or Jimmy Fallon or all the shows that he has been on. Sort of the more, most famously, I tell the story in the book, then his appearance on Between Two Ferns to sell the Affordable Care Act. I think his sense of humor and his comic timing were a superpower that we were able to use, both to remind people that he's a ordinary human in an extraordinary position, but also use it to push our message, particularly around healthcare. But I think the way I would describe Barack Obama in 2 ways. One, the guy I met in 2007, in January 2007, is the same guy. Obviously he's got a little more gray hair, maybe a few more scars on the back, but I have both of those as well, so I should note that. But that I met in January, the same guy I met in January of 2007 is the same one I saw on his last day of the presidency in January of 2017. And I would say in that, as I mentioned here to you, I say in the book, I gave 10 years of my life to Barack Obama, right? 8 years working for him and 2 years on the outside trying to be as helpful as I can. And in that time, never once did he ever give me any reason to question that decision. Did he make mistakes? Absolutely. Did I make more mistakes? Absolutely. But he is a good, decent, thoughtful human being who was as loyal to me as I was to him. Absolutely.
For a good, decent, wonderful, loyal human being to be in the White House again. Oh, my God.
I know.
Right?
Imagine that.
I can't at this point. I can't. And I can't take enough showers between now and when that can happen again because it's just so awful. But, a lot of people have been saying to me, Dan, 2020, maybe Trump could have beat Obama, but maybe not. Maybe we need Obama as vice president to run again in this wacky political environment. Why the heck not? I mean, you're laughing, but anything is possible today. Is that what it's going to take, though, to beat this guy? Because I I would love to be able to see some wonderful figure arise, another Barack Obama, out of the well of the Downs. But where is it? And that scares me. He's formidable. He's formidable.
I would find it hard. Yes, that's right. As Barack Obama used to say, as he was leaving the White House, that even if the Constitution gave him a third term, Michelle Obama didn't. So I find it hard to imagine that he is going to run for vice president. But I would say I think there's an important point there, which is Barack Obama is not going to be the person who saves us from Donald Trump, and he shouldn't be. As a party, we need to develop and focus upon the next generation of leaders. And everyone asks me everywhere I go, who is going to win in 2020, or who is our Obama? And the answer is we don't know. We didn't know Barack Obama was our Obama at this point in the 2008 election. In fact, I always remind people that there was a book that came out during 2006 by John Harris of Politico and Mark Halperin at the time of ABC News called The Way to Win, which was about how to win presidential campaigns. And it talks about what the Democrats and the Republicans and what they could do to win in 2008 in our current political environment. And if you were to do a search of that book, the two words you would not find anywhere were Barack and Obama. And so that tells you that we know very little about who might be our savior or the right candidate, because presidential campaigns are 100% about the match between the person and the moment. And we don't know what that moment's going to be in 2020 yet. When the voters go to caucus in Iowa in early 2020, we don't know what the politics of the economy will be. And so, like, right now, the best thing we can do, and my hope is, I hope all these people who are talking about running run. And they get out there and they make their case, and we have a debate. I hope it's a respectful, policy-based debate where we're not questioning each other's. I actually do think that there is. I mean, will get a little heated, absolutely, but I think that's okay within bounds, especially if the anger is dispersed over many candidates, as opposed to sort of polarizing as much as it was between Hillary and Bernie. And because I think as a party we have a lot to figure out. We have strategy questions. Are we going more left, as I would hope? Are we going more right? Are we how are we going to take on Trump? Are we going to go high? Are we going to go low? And more, even more important than that, we have huge policy questions that we should be debating, right? We should be debating Medicare for all. We should be debating universal basic income, a federal jobs guarantee, free college. And candidates will have to put some meat on the bones of what they mean about those statements. And let's have that debate, and let's let the voters decide, and let the pundits and the podcasters, sort of take a step back and not try to tell people who the most electable candidate is, because the history of reverse engineering the most electable candidate is pretty bad.
No, I agree with you on that, absolutely. But I have to ask you this.
Yeah.
Two things. First of all, have you spoken to the President Obama since lately? And what's his take? Is that a fair question? It's
a totally fair question. Yes, I have spoken to him. It's been a few months now, actually. But I think I did not divulge my private conversations with him then, and I won't now. But I think if you were looking for a view into his mindset about the current state of politics, I would highly recommend that everyone who did not get a chance to see it either watch or read the speech he gave in South Africa last week at the Mandela Lecture Series, which amazing. I thought was it's a reminder that eloquence was once a presidential trait, but also I think a sense of his view of politics. And I more than suspect, you will see him out in the fall, this year campaigning for Democrats, much as he was out there campaigning for Governor Ralph Northam or Governor Phil Murphy, or using his email list and other tools to help Doug Jones win in Alabama. So he wants to be out there where he can make the most difference, and that's going to be on the campaign trail, in my view.
And so, listen, I have to ask you this, because you're in the business of promoting people and do it so well. Who would you want to see the Dems? Do you have somebody in mind?
I don't. I like a lot of these people have been guests on Pod Save America. I've had a chance to meet or work with many of them. I'm fans of lots of them. And I really kind of want to step back and see how people do, because you just really have no idea how good a candidate is or how bad a candidate is until they actually start campaigning for president. Because the presidential campaign is unlike any other campaign.
Right.
It is hard. The scrutiny is greater. The pace is harder, and it's about you, the candidate, in ways in which Senate campaigns and gubernatorial campaigns and House campaigns simply aren't. My old friend David Axelrod always says that a presidential campaign is an MRI of the soul. And so you just have to see these people get out there. It's like you can watch, and I've done this. I've gone to Iowa with many people who were thinking of running for president. I've watched candidates thinking of running for president in Iowa, and going out there and coyly campaigning for a state senator or the governor candidate. It's just very different than going out there and saying to people why. To say, basically, I have scanned the waterfront of 300 million Americans, and I have decided that I am the best person to lead this country. And that's a tough argument to make, and you got to see people make it. So, like, whether it is candidates that have run before who are, particularly Joe Biden, I'm very personally fond of. I'm from Delaware, so he's been my senator or my vice president almost my entire 42 years on this planet. Bernie Sanders, who obviously proved himself to be, who you would have guessed would have been a terrible presidential candidate before he started running for president, turned out to be a great one. Whether it's, sort of these senators like Kirsten Gillibrand or Kamala Harris or Cory Booker or, people thinking of running from outside of Washington like Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles or Steve Bullock or Jay Inslee. And so a lot of these people, Elizabeth Warren, obviously, someone with a great political thing. I kind of just want to see everyone get out there and hold judgment for to see how they do. One candidate that I hope runs, just because I'm a big fan of his, and I don't know how good a presidential candidate will be, but he's someone who I'm very personally fond of, is Deval Patrick from Massachusetts. I think he'd have a lot to add. And so you sort of take the people, I don't know anyone who is actually running, no one has shared that information with me, but if you take the list of people who are thinking, are reportedly thinking of running or doing the things that people who often run for president do, I think we have a chance for a pretty, a very diverse list, diverse ideologically, diverse gender-wise, a lot of very talented women politicians running, which I think is very important. Yeah. You got a whole group of people that's interesting, and so let's see where it plays itself out, and just let's have a bunch of debates. Let's have people go to candidate forums. Let's have people go to living rooms in Iowa and New Hampshire and see where it goes.
I think that whomever it is has to be somebody who comes out of left field. Or right field, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Yeah.
I don't see it being somebody who's already in the mix. I just don't. Who can beat Trump? I think he's got too much goods on all of the people you named. But we'll have to wait and see. I want to talk to you about social media. It's here and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. You talk a lot about Twitter in the book. Talk to me here. Is social media change we can believe in? And as the title of one of your chapters says, are we in the new media wasteland? Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, it is like, it's not going anywhere. This is the new world we live in. There's a lot of bad with the new world. Twitter creates an incentive structure that rewards all the worst behavior, right? The Facebook algorithm, at least through the 2016 election, was one that was fueled by that. The best way to get Facebook to show your content to people was to be outrageous. It's what Breitbart and Trump figured out. And Facebook and Twitter have because they've helped disaggregate media, have diminished the voices of the referees, the ability of serious, legitimate, objective journalists to be able to call balls and strikes and have that information get out to voters and say, like, this is true, this is not true, this is real, this is false, is diminished, and all of that is bad. It is all very bad. Now, in fairness, there are some upsides to this, too, which is Twitter and Facebook democratize the distribution of information. And ultimately, I think that will be good, where, you don't have to work for the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN to tell a story. Any person with a phone can do it. And we've seen some amazing and important information that has gone viral because of Twitter and Facebook. We know a lot about some of this, about police violence and the killing of unarmed African Americans because people had phones and they had access to Twitter when it happened. And that is good for the world, that people get to hear those stories. I think that's important. But the question for Democrats cannot just sit around and bemoan the current state of the media, in which we could go back to a time where, maybe a time that never even existed, like it just existed in the minds of the people who watch All the President's Men and Spotlight and The Post. And we have to navigate this environment, and we have to find ways. Republicans have found a way to make their conspiracy theories, their outrageous information, their personal attacks, their racism go viral. And it's harder to make factual things, inspirational things, unifying things so viable. We have to find ways to do that. And we have to find ways as politicians and political operatives to talk in the authentic voices of these platforms. And look, Trump lies on Twitter all the time, but he is authentically dishonest on Twitter, and that has worked for him.
Oh, God.
Too many Democratic politicians, but people get that he's a liar, and he sounds like himself, right? He sounds like a person who woke up angry about something and tweeted. 99% of his tweets don't read like someone wrote them for him, mainly because of the typos, but too many Democrats sound like they are just putting out poll-tested, focus group 280-character talking points,
right.
And that does not work on Twitter.
So I want to go here with you down a slightly different path. We can talk Twitter. We can talk fake news. I think they're the same. They come under the same umbrella for sure. And we all know that that Trump traffics in this false conspiracy theories. Birther. All this kind of stuff. But here's the thing that I think is really interesting. Who are these people who are buying this crap, Dan? That is not something we've been good at here. I don't think we've really defined it, and that is the key, I think, to what you're talking about. Why do they buy birtherism? And racist is okay. That's great. Hillary called them deplorables, deplorable, uneducated, hopeless. The big Christians, right? Except that they're completely devoid of any moral turpitude at all. And I think in all of that is the problem. We're not defining who are these people and what is it that they're looking for that he was able to give them. Creep that he is, liar that he is, disgusting that he is, and by the way, and not only dishonest about lies, but dishonest about who he is, because, he won't.
Right.
Okay. So talk to me about that. I mean, is that something you guys are thinking about, who are the head of the party in a way?
Well, I think it's important. I think there is a sociological study that should be done to understand sort of that group of people, right? The people who will believe anything Trump says. And I think that's a group that's like 38% of voters, which means it's like 17% of American people, right?
It's a large number.
So it is actually it is a large number. But it is a smaller number than we think because so few Americans actually get involved in the political process. So it empowers this very vocal minority, and they have disproportionate sway in the Republican Party because of their ability to influence primaries. As a political operative, we're not going to get any of those voters, right? I am not worried that I have no strategy. I have no way to get them back, and there is what I am worried about are the people between the 38% and the 46% that Trump got. How can we get those back? And even more importantly, I'm worried about the people who did not turn out, the millions of Americans who, based on either age or where they live or demographics, suggest they would likely be Democrats or likely to vote for Hillary Clinton had they turned out. How do we get them to vote? How can we, as Democrats, as Barack Obama did in 2008, 2012, how can we inspire people who would not otherwise be part of the political process to get involved? And so it's a two-pronged strategy for Democrats. I think, to your point, we have a huge problem in this country about people believing fake news or conspiracy theories. And now we've always had people who believe, the moon landing was faked or that Elvis was alive or all of those things. That's been a part of American culture forever. But Facebook has weaponized it, right? And then you have a generation of people, and studies show most people who believe this are older. And the problem we have is we're in a little bit of this weird interregnum between people who grew up with old media rules but now get most of their news by Facebook because Facebook is the internet, particularly for older Americans. And so they're just not taught to be as skeptical of what they read as young people, right? And so I do think some of this is going to get better as younger people age into the electorate. You can see how internet savvy, for good and bad, but kids are today. You saw particularly with the Parkland kids who were able to navigate the internet to fight back against bullying and attacks, but also, organize rallies in millions of Americans around the country just off the internet. And so I think that the future is brighter here. We just have to navigate this era. And Democrats have to develop tools and strategies to push back, because some people will be gone forever. And then we have people who we can reach, who are believing things like that Hillary Clinton had a kill list or that Clintons were guilty of murder, who you should be able to convince them otherwise. And so I think we have to build tools and strategies to empower regular people to use Facebook to reach out to their networks to push back on this fake news.
Oh,
and I think that's going to be an important challenge for 2020.
And I hear you saying 2024 is when we're going to be okay. We may not make it in 2020. That scares me a little bit. But I mean, it's reality because it is an age. It's a baby. Yeah, it's a baby. We got to do it faster than that. We got to do it in a few months. I want to ask one quick question to you about Fox News and about a Sean Hannity or a Rush Limbaugh. Why can't the Dems do that? We just have failed. I mean, I know that Gore tried. Wherever we go, we cannot build these networks that become the voice of. I mean, why is that? And I want a real quick answer because I got a few more questions and I'm watching the time. Go ahead.
Sure. I think the problem is Democrats like they get their information from mainstream media. You ask them, they like NPR, the New York Times, and the local paper, and ABC News, and whatever else. And we profile as younger, Democrats are younger, and so they are not the cable news audience. So we have to build progressive media infrastructure that is not TV dependent. And that's exactly what we're doing at Pod Save America and what the larger crooked media effort that we have is trying to do, whether it's podcast or writing or whatever else. Is the key is going to be targeting an activist media that is entertaining and engaging for younger people. I think that is where the future for Democrats are.
Okay, so we're right back to that whole thing that it goes to the getting those younger people into the core, and us baby boomers, if you will, going goodbye, good luck. You had your chance. Get out. Okay, just a real fun one because I think I have to ask you this as a sidebar. You got to meet a whole lot of people. Queen of England, the Pope. Your favorite person who you met? You have to tell me.
My favorite person that I met at the White House was the Pope. I'm not Catholic. I'm a particularly religious individual, although I had gone to Catholic. I gone to a Jesuit college, but it was you just felt, this was our most recent Pope, and it just you just knew that you were around someone who was very special, and you were wanted to do it in the Vatican. Was incredibly special. I got to meet lots of cool people, whether it was, Jay-Z or LeBron James or, all these, athletes and actors. But you think back to being in the Vatican and meeting the Pope as a particularly special privilege for having worked in the White House.
Hey, Dan, Barack Obama, tell me something I don't know. Just you and me. Just whisper. Tell me something. Come on. Come on.
I mean,
give me something to hawk this interview.
I would say he is a very normal human being. He likes TV shows and music. He reads a good book. And here's something people don't recognize. He has a phenomenal memory, just a phenomenal memory. So the story I would tell is that early in the campaign, 2007, my brother, who lives in Atlanta, I brought him to meet Barack Obama. It was like March of 2007 at an event, and he met my brother. My brother is, he's a college professor and he's a poet, and particularly, 10 years ago, he was a little more of a hippie, and he had a soul patch. And so flash forward 4 years later, the president is going back to Atlanta, and he's going to see my brother. And we're headed there, and my brother's going to be at the event. I told the president, I wasn't going on the trip, I told the president that my brother would be. FYI, I said, you're going to see my brother and my brand new niece and my sister-in-law will be there. He said, he looks at me and goes, does your brother still have that soul patch? I was like, how did you possibly remember that? And I mean, they say that about politicians, but it's also, it's not just a trick, it's that he cares about the people he meets, and he cares about the people who are close to the people that work for him. And so I thought that was just an interesting view into both his abilities and his empathy.
Dan Pfeiffer, oh my God, listen to you. You're still a believer after all those years. That says something about who he is, you being so up close and personal.
Yes, it does.
Okay. And my bottom line question to you is what happens in the midterms? Are we screwed, or Mr. Cockeyed Optimist? Huh? Maybe, or just optimist?
I am conditionally hopeful, meaning we have a chance to take the House back and maybe even the Senate, but it just requires us to do the work. It requires people to register to vote, to volunteer, to canvass, to donate. And if we do that, we can be successful. But as we know, we cannot take citizenship. The lesson in 2016 is you cannot take citizenship for granted.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I've been speaking with Dan Pfeiffer. Dan Pfeiffer was one of Barack Obama's longest-serving advisors, serving as White House Director of Communications under President Obama and senior advisor to the president. Currently, Mr. Pfeiffer is a co-host of the popular political podcast, Pod Save America, and the author of Yes, We Still Can, Politics in the Age of Obama, Twitter, and Trump, available at fine bookstores everywhere. Find Dan Pfeiffer on Twitter at Dan Pfeiffer. You are listening to the Hallicasser-Jayne Show. My guests today are Dan Pfeiffer, the author of Yes, We Still Can, Politics in the Age of Obama, Twitter, and Trump, and Brian Abrams, the author of Obama, An Oral History, 2009 to 2017. The Hallicasser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasser-jayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find the Hallicasser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at the Hallie C. J. Show. Obtaining unprecedented access to Obamaworld, interviewing aides and advisors in the administration and on the campaigns, as well as several elected members of Congress, both Democrat and Republican, journalist Brian Abrams set out to compile an oral history of Barack Obama's presidency. The result is his book, Obama, An Oral History, an immersive chronology of the politics and governing behind a landmark American presidency. Manna for those who revere President Obama, and even those who do not. Certainly an important read for all historically minded. Offering behind-the-scenes stories, this amazing compilation illuminates the inner workings of an administration through more than 100 exclusive interviews with senior staffers including Jon Favreau, David Axelrod, Rahm Emanuel, Valerie Jarrett, and David Plouffe. Cabinet members such as Leon Panetta, Jack Lew, and Arne Duncan, and key lawmakers Chris Dodd, Joe Lieberman, Scott Brown, Barbara Boxer, among many others. Penetrating a vast political universe and cohesively and chronologically in Obama and Oral History, Abrams ably pieces together a series of narratives that are now the stuff of legend. The book opens with the introduction of a first-term state senator from Illinois who inspires a nation with promises of hope and change, and it goes on to examine the moments that define Barack Obama's presidency. We'll talk about some of those defining moments and more. Let's talk with the author of Obama, An Oral History, 2009 to 2017, Brian Abrams.
Hallie, how are you?
Good. I'm good, too. It's nice to talk to you. I mean, really, what a great book. My gosh, let's Barack Obama. Remember him? It seems like his presidency was like something that might have never happened. It seems so long ago. I guess time passes quickly when you're having a lousy time. And watching the current POTUS attempt to systematically undo everything that Obama set out to accomplish. I'm just so glad that you put this together. Tell us about the project quickly, what started you, why, and what you hope to accomplish.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I guess Obama and Oral History, I probably should start by describing what an oral history is for your listeners, which, it's different from the typical books about Washington, which are just in traditional prose format, which is perfectly fine. I love those and gobble those up too. But in your typical Washington book, the sources are generally on background, occasionally people quoted, whereas here I spent 2 years getting about 112 people on the record. So that's either, former White House staff or senior advisors. That's members of Congress, both Democrat and Republican. We're looking at, campaign strategists, cabinet secretaries. So anyway, you get these dozens and dozens of people on the record and then kind of slice and dice all those interviews to kind of into bite-sized quotes, and it's like a puzzle, right? And like you're just like telling the story of the last 10 years and through interviews exclusively. So what was the question?
I just wanted to know why you decided to do it and what you hope to accomplish. I mean, in it,
Yeah,
I think you kind of answered that in a way. You were going for bottom line truth, I think. Would that be fair to say?
Sure. I mean, I think, well, first off, I don't have a political journalism background. Most of my reporting is in pop culture. But, as the 2016 election, really sucked in everybody into the political space. I don't mean just journalists. I mean, just everyone became obsessed, as rightfully so. And, this was a great opportunity to do some heavier lifting and wrap my arms around, subjects on policy that I hadn't had the chance before. And I really wanted to speak to kind of two audiences at once because, on the one hand, I wanted to create a book that I knew people who love to gobble up political books would. I wanted them to devour this. But I also wanted to create something that was accessible to those who are new to the political space, like myself, and wanted to play catch-up on just what in the heck happened the last 10 years.
It's fascinating, and it works. A lot of people were involved in the Obama years. I mean, how did you even begin? Where were you going to start? Who were you going to go to? I mean, was there a list? How did you get this?
Yeah, I mean, I had a vague idea at the beginning of sort of what moments I wanted to focus on more than others. Just being aware of the timeline of the presidency. And this was, I began the project spring 2016, but throughout the process that changed. Some events became weightier than others, but I couldn't get into the inner circle of Obama until, months and months and months into the project. So I had to start out with, junior aides who were there for maybe a year and a half. You kind of work your way into retired congresswomen or senators, and maybe occasionally you get a cabinet secretary that's willing to speak with you, and you build it up until you get, say, 50, 60, 70 people on the record, enough to where you have credibility then to approach, Valerie Jarrett and ask for a half hour of her time because her name's been mentioned, 47 times.
Right.
That usually gets them to talk.
So let me ask you this. Were most of them, forgive me, I have a horrible cough, were most of them willing to talk to you? Did you have to beg, borrow, whatever, get the next guy over? Or
yeah.
How was it on a collective, yes or no, they were mostly willing to speak?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, as I mentioned, once I built that critical mass, the people who were closer to the inner circle and had more to guard became more willing to talk because they recognized, I think they just recognized that, I was doing a serious project and that they were going to be in it. They were going to be mentioned in it regardless, so they might as well join in. But I also think that, to put it on a super simple plane, people are people, whether they're in Hollywood or D.C. or Oklahoma or Alaska or Wisconsin or New York, and some will react and behave differently to others when it comes to talking to strangers. Hopefully you catch them on a good day, you warm up to them, and you get what you can from them, right. Whatever they're willing to share. Oh, and of course, and I say that as someone who, you go after specific people for specific topics. I didn't just sort of press record on the button and just wait for them to blab out whatever they wanted.
Right, I hear you. I listed in my interest some of the names of the folks that you interviewed. Who did you want to talk to? Who did you feel was important to record, who you couldn't get to? And they're not being a part of this wonderful historical compilation. Who bothered you that they're not in there?
That's a good question. So I think that there was a time constraint with me as well. I was already months beyond the deadline for the manuscript. And so there were some people I just couldn't get to. But, as I mentioned, if there were 112 people that agreed to speak, I easily reached out to another 130 who said no to me. But I think, I've done enough of these oral histories that I know that that's kind of the way it goes. And so by that point, I became more zen with it. I didn't get hung up if someone, said no. It's just going to happen. Some people are going to talk, and some people aren't, and you do your best to get everyone. And, you don't give up so easily. You don't take no for an answer right away. And, you get what you get.
Right, but was there one that you really go, oh, geez, one of these days I'm going to get to them? I know I have a list of people like that who I want to get to.
Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, I think about, like, okay, so Larry Summers, who was a giant voice in the sort of economic circle of the first term of the Obama presidency, and a controversial figure who seemed, as it's been kind of reported, he seemed to spearhead the more conventional policy approach to some of the financial sector decisions. It would have been great if he agreed to talk. He didn't. I got plenty of other economists who did, and I thought they were all wonderful sort of storytellers. A guy like a Greg Craig, who
whose name
who ran the White House.
Right. That man. I'm so funny that you said that because I've worked. That name makes me crazy. Does it make you crazy? What were his parents?
Craig?
Yeah. What were his parents thinking with that name? Sorry. Sidebar.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess they just wanted to torture him. Well, no. So Greg Craig. So he ran the White House counsel's office the first year and a half. And, his big project was the shutting down of Gitmo, which didn't happen for a number of reasons. I would have loved to have spoken with him about, his frustrations.
Okay.
So I mean, it's true. There are characters I would have loved to have included, but...
Well, there has to be a part two is the reason I went down that road with you. I want you to do number two and go and get the rest. Because I really enjoyed this. I see. So there's a method to the madness here. Listen to me on this, Brian. I being a journalist myself, I know how sometimes you want to keep what you're doing under wraps. You don't want people to be influenced by what they may know or one way or the other. And that was an issue for you, too. And it's Washington, darling. Everybody wants to tell everybody everything. Was it hard to keep this project under wraps?
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, most people didn't see me coming. And that was because when I got the book contract for it, typically the book industry will set out a press release, hey, so-and-so is writing a book about XYZ. And I asked that they hold back on that. It's how can you announce that you're doing an oral history when you don't have any of the interviews yet? And it was actually really risky of the publisher to even give me that deal in the first place. So for the fact that they didn't see me come in, I get that word travels anyway. But I wasn't too worried about that. I mean, I kind of knew that some people would know that I'm working on this and others weren't. But the idea of keeping it secret was important so that no one got together and said, "Hey, None of us are talking to this guy."
Right.
And I've had that I've had that happen to me in other stories before. I didn't know if Obama people would react that way or not, so I couldn't take that chance.
Let me get into some specifics here with you. The Obama years, let's just look at some of his accomplishments. I mean, first, he was America's first black commander-in-chief. I want to talk a little bit about that. From your conversation with the Inner Circle, how relevant was that, not just in getting him elected, although there would be some who would say he got elected because he was black or biracial, but how it affected the day-to-day operation of his presidency and its goals. Did that come up?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. As far as the electorate that made up his victory in 2008, there's been data that's released that shows that while yes, it's true that African American turnout was much higher for Obama than for a John Kerry or for a Hillary Clinton, but there's also data that shows that there were Democrats or independents that stayed at home because of his race, and so that begins to wash each other out. In other words, so his blackness didn't. It's hard to say that that's what got him elected or didn't, get him elected. It's hard to say. I mean, he still won Indiana in 08, and he won Iowa in 08 and 12. So, I mean, I know you want to talk about the other stuff, oral history stuff, but it is something I think about that, the fact that he had a strong message in both of his campaigns was what got him across the finish line, not his race. It was the message. We've had black candidates for president before.
I just was
so
also
his message resonated.
Right. Whether or not the governance on a day-to-day basis was influenced by the fact that he was, the first African American president, and if that came up in any of the conversations you had.
Yeah, well, certainly, Cody Keenan, who was the chief speechwriter for Obama in the second term, he talks about this in the book a bit. It's mentioned in a few spots, but the race of Barack Obama didn't seem to navigate, the ways in which he governed or communicated. That as Cody puts it, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, that wasn't interesting to him. He didn't. I think when you look at the sort of the race baiting and like that Fox News was responsible for, and for that matter, the Republican Party for 35 years. That when you look at that sort of narrative being mastered in the media by conservatives, Obama didn't like. He found it boring. He found it dumb. It's not a worthy debate. He kind of left out of it. I mean, the fact that he did show his birth certificate, I'm sure just drove him up the wall. He just was just sick of it and just wanted to move on. So I just don't think that was interesting to him. He wanted to have a more sophisticated debate, which...
Right, but one wonders, if it got in the way of some of what he wanted to do. Here's something else that I think is worth talking about.
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, not to interrupt, but I mean, we live in a white supremacist society. I mean, that is the fact of the United States. I mean, even then, that's just, this is a system that has people of color at a disadvantage. So certainly, I mean, there was always a racial undertone to every critique of President Obama, and I don't mean that as an excuse, No,
I understand.
But,
sure. Yeah.
It was there. There's no question.
He inherited this just ridiculous economic mess, and I was curious from the interviews. Did we, as the American public, know just how bad it was? And I could say that across the board from a lot of the subject matter that came up in your conversations with people. How well portrayed was what was going on the inside and the reality of what was going on the inside by the press during his administration compared to what you discovered in talking to people following the administration? Were there surprises?
With regard...
Well, you could say that across the board. You could say economically was the crisis far worse than we thought it was, or was ISIS worse or better than we thought? I mean, in other words, the truth that you went into perceiving all of this, and then after talking to people, did it change how you viewed it? Because being on the inside, they saw things differently than we as Americans see it, because we only get what the press shows us.
I don't believe that. Okay, I'd say on the one hand, White House access for the Obama administration from the media was not as transparent as it should have been. There's no question about that. On the other side of it, of course, I mean, the discourse on cable news doesn't really lend itself to informing us of much beyond just the surface. People don't have a lot of time on their hands at any rate to dig into the weeds of policy. Podcasts and radio is better for that. But I think, to answer your question, what the communications shop out of the White House sort of frame as the story of the day for whatever the issue was versus what was actually happening. I mean, I suppose, yes, there is some disparity there. Not to the point where they tried to tuck us in like little children every day. I just think that when you think about the presidency from a few years ago, the truth is you didn't think about it the way you do now.
Well, that's always true. That's the wonderful thing about history. It gives you a different perspective. But let me move on because I'm watching the clock and I know I went over on some of this, but I know you guys will work with me on this. The biggest surprise for you was what? The
biggest surprise for me was more personal, was that I found myself enamored by the budget wars more than I ever thought I would be. And it just never occurred to me that I would find myself interested in anything having to do with counting numbers. I've always avoided math my entire lifetime, and I failed. I mean that's why I got into writing. I thought I wouldn't have to do this, and I was wrong. But interviewing a lot of the economic advisors, Austin Goolsbee and Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary, Gene Sperling, Jason Furman, they're all really articulate and colorful in the ways in which they talk about the multiple phases of budget negotiations. I found myself I dove right into that.
What about Hillary and her loss and the loss of his legacy? And certainly we're watching that on a day-to-day basis with Mr. Trump. Seems to be whatever he can do to destroy everything that was ever Obama or Hillary. What was their take on that? How painful is all of this?
You talk to a lot of those people today. I still sort of maintain connections with people in Obamaworld, but even when interviewing them, this was happening. I was still getting some people on record in the year 2017, and there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of disappointment, and and that's a conversation in the book as to whether or not the administration should have gone more aggressively in terms of battening down the hatches and trying to get more things done than they could. Look, we'll see what happens. We'll see what survives its day in the courts and what doesn't. But the current administration's still doing a heck of a job unraveling it all.
Absolutely. For you, though, Brian, from beginning to end, you're a citizen. You're a writer, obviously, and put together a great book. But as a citizen, biggest lesson you learned from all of this about Obama and his presidency?
I go back and forth. I play these parlor games all the time. I feel at times I'm proud of what they did and the progress that was made, and other times I'm angry that they weren't aggressive enough. It's still an emotional roller coaster for me, as it is for most people. And it's an education that's ongoing.
Do part 2. Phenomenal. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. I've been speaking with Brian Abrams, the author of 3 best-selling Kindle singles, and now An Oral History of Late Night with David Letterman, Gawker, An Oral History, and Die Hard, An Oral History. He's written for the Washington Post magazine, Time, and the Lowbrow Reader. His new book, Obama, An Oral History. For more information on Brian and his books, visit Brian at brianlabrams.com and follow him on Twitter at Brian Abrams. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Hallicasser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. Be sure to tune in Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, when new podcasts are posted at hallicasser-jayne.com and on all your favorite apps. We are open 24/7. So, until next time, when we meet again, this is Hallicasser-Jayne.